juveniles are caught stealing something from a corner store, we're not talking about sending them to jail. We need to put them in rehabilitative programs to help get them the help that they need, because we know something's not right. But after the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th time, something's gotta give. Something needs to change. And the legislators in this building need to wake up and realize that. I am asking that they call for a special session today to address this, to talk about the bill that the House Republicans had tried to propose that would make things a little bit easier for our law enforcement, for our rehabilitative services to function, to get these kids back on the right path. As a mom, this is even more frustrating. I would never let my kid go out and do things like what's happening out here. I know that there's consequences for actions, but unfortunately we also know that there's some parents that don't have that structure at home, they don't care, and they look to us to provide that for them. And it's up to the people in this building to make sure that those supports are being had. And I really hope that something gives, something soon, something's gotta change. Normal people that live in our state are scared. The group from Glastonbury, you're scared. You don't know what's going to happen because of vigilantism that's going on. You know, my chief is here too, and he's gonna speak a little bit about the repeat offenders that we have and the types of crimes that we're dealing with. We're not talking about stealing things from a corner store. We're talking about violent sexual assaults. We're talking about violent rape. And these 16 and 17-year-olds are still out, and we're letting them back home to their parents. Something's gotta change. I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Dunn of Wolcott.
Thank you. Great job, Mayor. And, thank you, everyone, for being here today. We were talking a little bit before, and I think the word that came out was tolerance, and really, we just can't tolerate it anymore. You're going to hear so many stories, so many different stories, and again, it's about the petty breaking into cars and then going into, but if you watched over what happened in Wolcott the last week, damaging our senior center wasn't the word. It was devastating. And then just leaving the senior center and going down and stealing someone's car and backing into 2 other cars. So the message really to everyone, who's responsible? When they call my office, I met with a couple yesterday, they had $10,000 worth of damage to their car. All they're asking for a few things is a fence to be put up, their privacy, and somebody to pay the bill. I don't have an answer for them because that's what's happening, pointing the finger. But I think someone up here at the state, when they do meet, these are the questions that have to be answered. We all have to be responsible for what we do. We have to be responsible for our actions. I think every single one of us said this morning, we don't want to see these children hurt. But right now, somebody's letting them be hurt. They're letting them get out on the street. They're letting them get in a car. They're driving. Every single car that gets stolen in our town smashes into something. And now, in New Britain, it was somebody. That's what's happening. This has been happening for the past 2 or 3 years. Constantly, I just drive into Dunkin' Donuts locally and a car's stolen and they're driving right through stop signs, coming in front of you, the kids are bailing out. But when they're caught, when they are caught, somebody has to be responsible. That's our message here. You're gonna hear so many other stories that are really crucial for people to hear and know that it's bad. So I'm here today to send a message that something has to be done. We can't tolerate it anymore. And somebody has to be responsible when these kids are caught. Somebody has to pay the damage of these people's car. They just have to call their insurance company and that's it? No, we can't do that. We have to work together. The only way we're gonna get this done is working together, and we're all in this for the children. They are our future, and we don't wanna see anybody else hurt. Thank you. My job, my one and only job. I got too worked up. The Chief of New Britain, thank you.
Good morning. Today I'm here to talk about the broken juvenile justice system. Most of us in law enforcement refer to this system as the arrest, release, repeat. It's sad that it's taken several tragedies in the state to get the attention of some lawmakers. To give some perspective of the crisis we are dealing with, I've identified 9 repeat juvenile offenders that live in the city of New Britain. These 9 offenders are our worst offenders. On average, each one of these offenders have been arrested 18 separate times between the ages of 12 and 17 years old. To highlight, we have one offender who is currently 15 years old today. He has been arrested a total of 17 times. That's since he was 12 years old, so that's only a little over 2 years. His charges include larceny, larceny of a motor vehicle, burglary, theft of a firearm, possession of an assault rifle, and possession of a high-capacity magazine. He's currently out and about right now. To give some perspective of this 15-year-old, when we arrested him and caught him in possession of that assault rifle, we had to issue him a juvenile summons and return him to his parents. That's some perspective just to keep in mind. We have another offender who's currently 17 years old. He's been arrested 25 separate incidents since he's turned 12 years old. His charges include criminal mischief, disorderly conduct, assault, assault on police, threatening, operating without license, evading responsibility. And then we have our third offender of our worst. He was arrested 40 times. That's 40 times from the age of 12 to 17. His charges include larceny, stolen motor vehicles, theft of a firearm, carrying a pistol without a permit, assault on police, many incidents of that, assault with a firearm, robbery with a firearm, burglary, and reckless driving. The juvenile justice system has failed these offenders. The current system did not set a path for these offenders to rehabilitate and become productive, law-abiding adults. The current system did not find the root cause of these problems and correct it. The current system did not protect the public from their illegal behavior. The current system did the exact opposite. By not holding any of these teenagers accountable, it allowed them to reoffend and reoffend and reoffend again and again and again. It's not a new problem for Connecticut. The Connecticut legislative body created an environment in the state that sends a message to our youth that there are no consequences for your actions. Most of these problems started a decade ago when the juvenile age was raised to from 16 to the age of 18. Advocates at that time claimed that treating 16-year-olds as adults only led them to reoffend. Based on that data I just gave you, not holding teens accountable for these actions made them reoffend, turned them into career criminals. I don't know what we're going to do when they're 18, because now we have a sophisticated, emboldened individual who's going to continue to create these crimes. The most frightening thing I've ever heard come from politicians and advocates saying that they need to raise the juvenile age to 20 or 21. If you're going to do that, you better raise the driving age to 21, the voting age to 21, you better enlisting into the military to 21, and you better tack on a few years of high school, because apparently, if you think in that logic, we don't know right or wrong until we're in our 20s. And that is a very frightening idea. There is a very small, narrow population of these repeat offenders. However, they're generating the majority of these crimes. They are so bold that they're broadcasting on social media how they're driving around in stolen cars, how they're possessing illegal firearms, how they're bragging about the robberies they're committing and the assaults that they're committing. They're taking no effort to hide their behavior. And when we arrest them, they laugh at us because they know exactly what's going to happen, nothing. We're going to release them right back out. In one instance, we arrested the same 16-year-old in the same day for 2 separate stolen cars. He was arrested for a stolen car, released, stole another car, we arrested him again. We have repeatedly identified and arrested 16 and 17 years old for sex assault in the first degree. That means rape by force. Because of our current laws and some of the opinions of some of these judges out here, we were unable to obtain an order of detention for these offenders. In layman's terms, we could not take those offenders into custody. We had to release them back to their parents with a juvenile summons. Think about that. Our detectives are dealing with the victims of these horrific crimes. We're speaking to the families. We're assuring them that we're going to bring justice to them and arrest these sexual offenders. And we have to turn around and give a summons to a 17-year-old? What about the victims? If you don't see that there's something wrong with that, I really have nothing else to say here. The public is very aware of what's going on out there, and the frustration level is getting very high. In some cases, the public is turning towards vigilantism, or they're trying to confront these juveniles themselves. We don't want this, we can't have this. There's no faith in our justice system at this point when it comes to juvenile offenders. We need our lawmakers to go back to the drawing board, restore some type of juvenile justice system that works, so that the public has faith again in our justice system. I'm going to turn this over to the Chief of Wolcott PD.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Ed Stevens, Chief of Police for the Wolcott Police Department. I'm here today asking that the juvenile laws in handling of repeat, that's the key word, repeat juvenile offenders. Not first time, repeat. A few years ago, during the previous administration here in Hartford, the handling of juvenile offenders and penalties and repercussions for the criminal actions were changed. The Connecticut Juvenile Training School was also closed. Prior to these changes, we did not have the serious problems that we now have. These changes set in motion the reason I'm here today. We're not saying that every juvenile offender should be incarcerated. I want to make that clear. Not every juvenile offender incarcerated. That's the farthest thing from the truth. Many juveniles do things they regret, and with proper supervision and guidance, they don't commit any more crimes and become productive citizens. We're here to say that changes must be made to the way repeat juvenile offenders are held accountable for their actions. The system we now have doesn't work for all juvenile offenders. Approximately 2 years ago, the Connecticut Chiefs were here at the Capitol when Chief Spagnola from Waterbury PD, along with Senator Hartley and Representatives Reyes and Cummings, spoke on behalf of changing juvenile laws concerning thefts of motor vehicle. It had been proposed from Chief Spagnola that after a juvenile is convicted for the third time of stealing a car, the repercussions of his or her crime would be more severe. Not after the first, not after the second, after the third time. Evidently, this fell on deaf ears because nothing changed and juvenile crime escalated. Other than the obvious problems of juvenile crimes, people are losing their lives. Both victims and, as in the recent New Britain case where a man was run down by a 17-year-old in a stolen car who had 13 previous arrests. But the juveniles are also dying. There were 2 juveniles that stole a car in Wolcott. They raced it into Waterbury where they were racing with a car that went with them to steal the car. 2 kids died in that car. There was recently a woman shot at in Glastonbury who had yelled out to juveniles stealing her car, as well as a juvenile being shot while she was trying to steal a car in Ridgefield. So people are getting hurt and dying, whether it's the juveniles or the victims. We recently had a vehicle stolen in Wolcott with 2 children inside. The older brother was able to jump out, but his 4-year-old sister was still inside that car. Thank God the vehicle was recovered with the young girl still inside. We were very lucky that no harm came to her. She could have been involved in a crash. She could have walked out in the middle of the night into the woods. Who knows? We were very lucky. Last week, we were able to make an arrest of one of the parties involved in that case. He was a 17-year-old. This case is still being investigated, and more juvenile arrests are anticipated with this kidnapping and theft of the car. Also, last week, our senior center was burglarized and ransacked. The parties who committed these acts then stole a car. Arrests were made. Both offenders, who are under the age of 18, were previous offenders. One was even laughing and said nothing will happen to him. He wasn't worried in the least. Repeat juvenile offenders know that the current system does not hold them accountable. It only emboldens them to commit more crimes because they know that nothing will happen. And they pretty much do what they want. The present system doesn't help them. Quite the opposite. It turns these repeat juvenile offenders into hardened criminals. Many times they're carrying guns, in some instances shooting when confronted. By not changing the way repeat juvenile offenders are handled, crime will only escalate and more lives, both victims as well as the repeat juvenile offenders, will be at risk. I'm not here today to place blame on anyone, any agency, or any administration in particular, but to help identify the issues so that hopefully we can all come together to do what is right and protect both the victims and these repeat juvenile offenders. What we have now is a broken system. Let's work together to fix it so no one's hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And to that end, today we are standing here requesting that we go back into special session to address this issue. And we're asking our colleagues in the Senate and the House on both sides of the aisle to join me in signing a petition to bring us back into session sometime this summer to address this very important issue. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or you could ask any questions of the individuals we had speaking. Right, absolutely, there is a happy medium, because right now with the state of Connecticut funded all of our programs. If a car is stolen and a police officer has to wave for it and let it drive by unless there's an imminent threat. And so those laws need to be looked at. I think on the back end of the system, we need to address programs for our youth to make sure that they are not repeat offenders. And currently, those programs really are lacking in the state of Connecticut. You know, the third piece is that right now we are not detaining our juvenile criminals, and what's happening is they're being put into group homes, into communities that aren't set up or equipped to be handling these type of individuals. So they're put into communities, our law enforcement and our government doesn't even know where they're housed, and they're put into group homes for DCF children that might have different behavioral issues, and they are now then being influenced by these individuals who are committing crimes. So the whole system really needs a top to bottom look through.
Is there a model law somewhere or a state that's doing this well that Connecticut could?
I don't know of a model law in particular, but I think there's some policies that were put in place in Connecticut recently that we need to reevaluate. And I do bring it back to the most recent changes in the police accountability bill. We talk about not wanting to overreact, but here was a bill that was passed in the summertime very quickly to address an issue that didn't even happen in the state of Connecticut. And once the law was passed, we've made no attempt to evaluate the impacts of those laws. So our police officers don't have the ability to necessarily do their job. And it's very frustrating and frightening to have these conversations with our officers and to hear their plight of how they cannot protect our individuals and our residents, but also these juveniles that are committing crimes. Many of us up here are parents. We are raising our children in a very different environment, a very difficult environment in the state of Connecticut. And these laws are doing them no favors. Let's, Matt. Yeah. Well, and I think certainly, we've seen, initiatives during this last session with putting money toward the Fatherhood Initiative to try to help develop the family unit. And that is certainly something on the front end that the state of Connecticut should be looking at. I think right now we're talking about once kids are already into the system, how we address them. But certainly, we should be continuing to look at those type of programs like the Fatherhood Initiative to prevent these issues from occurring.
What is the threshold? I mean, when you talk about when the developmental programs end and when there's a harsher penalty, is it a three-strike rule? I mean, where is the threshold?
Well, I mean, right now we had asked for a three-strike rule for our juveniles, but I think there's a few thresholds here. We need to look at the nature of the crime, whether it's a first-degree sexual assault versus a homicide. Both of those are violent crimes. Manslaughter is a violent crime, and so is a rape. But those are treated very differently in the juvenile courts, and I think we have to have a conversation about children that are committing those kind of violent crimes to be able to put them into a system that helps give them helps prevent the recidivism. Because if teenagers are committing those type of crimes, they need help, and Connecticut isn't giving them that help.
Do you favor reopening the juvenile training school for the worst of the worst, for lack of a better term?
I think there needs to be a conversation of what type of detention facilities and the adequacy of those facilities that we have in the state of Connecticut. That facility was closed without any alternative, and what we're hearing, and I think our chiefs could speak to this, These individuals are being released into DCF houses, and they are not given the proper programs that they need to help correct their actions. So right now, what is happening in the state of Connecticut is very cruel. These children are being left and put out back on their own without any type of evaluation. There's oftentimes no communication with DCF, which is supposed to be charged with helping family units that have broken down. These children are potentially released right back into those families that could be helping to create the bad situations for these kids.
Do you feel that juvenile training school was closed prematurely? In other words, it should have been phased out for a longer period of time, and that frankly should still be open?
It was closed certainly without a plan. So regardless of how people felt about it, it was closed without a plan, and now we're seeing the impacts of that.
You favor rolling back to raise the age policy?
I think there has to be a conversation about what types of crimes should and what ages should have ramifications to those crimes. I mean, as it was stated, if we're talking about petty theft, certainly an individual should be given a chance, and we had AR programs that allowed for these kids to apply for. So I think everybody here doesn't deny the fact that juveniles should be given second chances. What we saw this last legislative session was a focus of giving adults second chances and erasing criminal records without even having this other piece of the conversation. And we're at two extremes here. The legislature has gone down a very extreme path of having complete erasure of criminal records and not addressing at all criminal activities of our juveniles. There needs to be balance. Be respectful. Excuse me? Automatic erasure after 10 years or 7 years in the state of Connecticut. Those type of policies should not be what we were focusing on this last legislative session. The policies that we should be focusing on is addressing the crimes that are out there that are causing our children to be put into harm's way, and that is creating vigilante justice in the state of Connecticut. Because our fear is that the next time a teenager is shooting at a residence from their home, shots are going to be fired back. That is what we want to avoid. This situation is escalating, it is not de-escalating, and we need to address it.
Did you meet with the House Democrats this morning, or was that this afternoon?
We are meeting with them at 12 o'clock today.
Can you chiefs talk about that issue of vigilantism and what you're seeing? And also, do you guys have like statistics in terms of that can quantify the increase in crimes from the last 5 years?
I don't have any stats right in front of me right now, but we're definitely seeing an increase with homeowners, business owners that are taking matters into their own hands. They're now confronting the juveniles, and they're tackling them. They're trying to hold on to them until we show up. They're chasing them in some cases. This is not what we need. I mean, this is not what society should be. But it's coming from, there's a lack of faith in the system. And we need to restore that public trust again, because it's not there. And it's not from lack of law enforcement identifying and apprehending these offenders, it's what happens next. And these conversations of exclusivity of, it's either got to be find the root cause and look for social programs versus some type of training facility or a detention center. It's got to be a completely all-out approach to this. We need to identify all of the approaches and see what's working. But we can tell you right now, whatever's in place right now, it's not working. It's not working at all.
Are you though able to say, like, 5 years ago we had X number of car thefts. Today we have Y number of car thefts?
Yes, we had a significant increase in 2020, a significant increase. I don't have those percentages off the top of my head, but from 2019 to 2020, a significant jump. Worse, in the city of New Britain, we had a 300% increase in shootings going from 2019 into 2020. So, and a lot of those offenders are the ones that I just rattled off a little while ago. They were involved in these shootings, and they were under the age of 18 years old.
So do you believe the data, the number crunchers who say that, this is only due to the pandemic, and as soon as everybody gets back to school in the fall, this problem is going to go away?
I don't believe that one bit. What happened is all of these offenders have been emboldened. They have no shame in their game. They're broadcasting on social media live them committing these crimes. There is no recourse what happens next. An arrest, court, nothing happens. Over and over and over again. So the pandemic, in my opinion, had no effect on this.
Yeah, I think that right now it's interesting because DCF doesn't sort of have the expertise or the ability to be dealing with these situations yet. These children have been put on their doorstep because they have nowhere else to go. So certainly I do think that, you know, the stakeholders in this are law enforcement and our judicial branch, and we need to have these conversations about how we need to fix this. It really needs to be a top-down approach. But I think what we could say is regardless of what our stats are for crimes rising and lowering in the state of Connecticut, it doesn't take a lot for people to go on social media and to have conversations in the community. I have never in my life seen the number of residents that are talking about car thefts and break-ins and these violent juvenile crimes. And so the fact that we are even having this press conference today, I think demonstrates the fact that there needs to be action. We can't put our head in the sand and say everything is good the way it is. No one believes it.
What's like the mechanism that you want to use to make the reforms you're talking about? Are you going to resurrect an old bill? Are you talking about amending the police accountability law? Is it a joint resolution?
Well, we had a bill in the Judiciary Committee, and I think it's a good start. It had a public hearing. It was voted out of the Judiciary Committee, I think on a bipartisan basis. So I think that's the first step is to start with that conversation. But I also think we need to bring the stakeholders to the table and have a conversation to try to make other reforms as well.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. As far as the COVID, you know, that COVID's blamed on a lot of things. Like I said, few years back, Chief Spagnola, Senator Hartley, we were here because of the increase in stolen cars by repeat offenders. This didn't just happen because of COVID. This was way before we seen it coming. What's that there, buddy? Have you ever dealt with any children yet or no? I can't hear you.
So far, you haven't had much success winning Democrats over to your way of thinking. So, what are your thoughts? And this is not the first time that the House Republicans have launched a petition drive to call the legislature into special session. It's kind of standard how you guys play.
That's right. I mean,
What is your real expectation of what's going to happen on this issue?
we have two ways to get into special session. Is one, to call us in via petition, which requires a majority of Senate and House members to sign the petition. The second way is for the governor to call us in. So either of those options do stand. And I think, you know, we have been trying to address this issue for over 4 years. I remember testifying in the Judiciary Committee on the very bills that we've had. We are incrementally making a little bit of progress. 4 years ago, the bills were summarily dismissed. Now we saw that bill get out of the Judiciary Committee. So I'm hopeful that we will, that our Democrat counterparts will begin to see the light and we could start seeing some movement. But it's unfortunate that it took someone's life to get us here today because we knew this was a problem 4 years ago and the conversation should have happened sooner.
Did you catch any of the governor's remarks yesterday concerning
I caught some of them, but not specifically.
I was going to ask you, what do you think you would have more success in presenting your arguments to him? He'd be more receptive to the arguments of, say, the Democrats in the legislature might be.
You know, we certainly are willing to have that conversation with the governor. He has not shown an interest in these proposals throughout the legislative session. But again, I'm hopeful that he will come around. You know, there's been talk we have COVID money to put toward this issue. But if we don't look at the systemic problems with what has been created, all the money in the world is not going to fix this problem.
You mentioned detention orders and putting juveniles back in the custody of their parents. So is this something that the legislature can deal with, or is this really something more decided?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the legislature changed the laws and took discretion away from our court systems. So I think we have to have a conversation of putting that discretion back to some degree. Right now, in many cases, their hands are tied. For instance, our police officers need to release juveniles after 6 hours of detention, essentially. I mean, those are the strict rules that are put in place that we think we need to take a look at. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Do you have any Democratic support at this point? Any Democrats they would support you?
There are certainly Democrats that have reached out to me and I want to have this conversation. When we ran our amendments on the floor in the House, there were Democrats that supported the Republican amendments in the House, absolutely. Thank you.